This story happened to me many years ago when I was about 12. My family went to Thanksgiving at my grandmother's house every single year. There was quite a few of us that would be there, and we would always watch football and have a big turkey. I remember this year, it was about 3 p.m. and it got kind of crowded inside my grandmother's house. My younger brother and I decided to go outside and walk around. My grandmother had a pretty big property that had some woods on it on either side of the house. She definitely lived more out in the country, so the houses were a lot farther apart. My younger brother and I just kind of walked around the yard. It had snowed a little bit, so the ground was a mix of white snow and the green grass. We ended up wandering off through the side woods a little bit, but then we noticed someone. There was a man standing there about 50 feet away. He looked to be fairly young, but was definitely an adult. He was wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants, which I found strange because it was pretty cold outside. When he noticed us, he waved. Then he called out hi to us in a friendly voice and began to walk over. When we got over to him, he introduced himself and said his name was Oscar. He told us he lived next door, and then pointed over. We could see a house through the trees that he was pointing at. He asked us what we were doing out here, and we told him that we were there for Thanksgiving. The three of us chatted for a couple of minutes about basic stuff, until finally I said we should get back. The man then told us he needed some help getting his new washing machine from his garage into his house, and asked us if we would help. I really didn't feel comfortable doing it, and I also didn't want to, so I told him I'm sorry but no thanks. Then me and my brother started to walk away. The man said he understood, and then started to walk back up to his house. We went through the woods, which took us about 5 minutes to get back. When we had just about made it back, I was sure I heard someone walking behind us at a pretty far distance. I turned around, but I didn't see anything. My brother and I made it back inside just in time for dinner. As we sat down, our grandmother asked us how it was out in the yard. We told her how we had talked to the next door neighbor. She looked surprised when we said this, and asked us which neighbor. We pointed in the direction and said the house next door. She told us that the house over there was vacant and nobody had lived there in about a year. When she said that, it gave me the chills. I was so glad I said no to helping the man. When I was a kid, we used to have the whole family over for Thanksgiving. One year, we were cleaning the house the night before Thanksgiving, and my parents were cooking some of the pies. It was a great smell throughout the house, but I was busy taking things from upstairs and putting them down in the basement so there would be more room for everyone up there. Our basement wasn't finished, but we had a lot of things down there, and even an area with a rug and a TV where we would play video games sometimes. My mom asked me to bring up a couple extra chairs that we also kept down there. I went to the back corner behind the stairs where they were. It was the creepiest part of the basement in my opinion because it was just way back and in the corner. As I reached a chair, I thought I heard a noise behind me. Then, about 6 feet to my right, next to a large box, I saw a person slowly crawl from behind the box to behind the refrigerator that was next to the stairs. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It looked like a man with long hair and baggy clothes. My first instinct was to run, but I knew that I would have to run past the man if I wanted to go back upstairs. So I did what the next best thing in my mind was, and that was to hide behind the chairs. I wanted to get back upstairs, but as far as I knew, the man was still behind the fridge. I waited there for what felt like an eternity. In reality, it was probably about 10 minutes. At last, I heard the door to upstairs open, and at first I was scared until I heard my mother call out asking to me what was taking so long. This made me feel a little more confident, so I walked out, and as I was talking to her, I said I would bring it right up. I grabbed the chairs and made my way upstairs, but to my surprise, when I got to the fridge, the man was gone. He must have somehow went somewhere else. I went back up the stairs, and as soon as I was completely up, I slammed the door shut and told my mom there was a man down there. When my dad heard this, he went downstairs to look around. He came back up about 5 minutes later saying there was nobody down there at all. I even went back down with him, and we couldn't find anyone. I felt crazy and as if I was imagining things. I thought maybe somehow the man had left, but I knew he wasn't down there anymore. I went to bed that night, still unsure of what had really happened. When I woke up on Thanksgiving morning, I went downstairs. I noticed I was the first one awake, so then I went to the basement door. When I did, I saw the door was wide open. The front door to our house was also unlocked. When my parents got up, we all went downstairs to look around and saw nothing. Whoever was down there must have left in the night, and I no longer felt crazy. I did, though, feel a lot more creeped out. But how they avoided us the first time we went down there, I will never know. This is the scariest and craziest thing to ever happen to me, and it happened on Thanksgiving. It was when I was about 18 or 19 years old, and my family was hosting Thanksgiving at our house. I would say in total there was about 15 people there, mostly my cousins, aunts, and uncles. We had lots of food, and it seemed to be another great Thanksgiving. By about 9 p.m., a few people had left and gone home, and I was sitting on the couch watching football. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, the power in our house went completely out, and everything was pitch black. It was strange because it wasn't storming or anything. Then we started hearing these loud bangs at the front door. It was pretty frightening, and I slowly got up and left the room to look out the window to the front door. There were several men standing there right at the front door, wearing all black with ski masks. As soon as I saw this, I immediately jumped back. Then they started banging on the door once again. My dad went towards the door, and when he saw the men, he ran to go get his gun. The banging got louder, and then one of the men ran over to the window and started banging on it. The rest of the people at our house all started going upstairs, and I know I heard someone say they were calling the police. My dad came back down and showed his gun in the window and yelled out he was about to shoot them all. I thought he was crazy for doing that, but it ended up working. The men all ran away, and within another 5 minutes, the cops had arrived. They stayed for a while, and eventually, my dad was able to get our generator working, which restored our power for the night. It turns out they had cut one of our power lines. It made for a crazy Thanksgiving night. Many years ago, when I was a kid, I was going with my parents to my uncle's house for Thanksgiving. He lived in the city in a big neighborhood with lots of houses. I was probably about 7 or 8 at the time, and it was nice, but there wasn't really anyone else my age there, so I would get bored at family things. We got there and talked to everyone in the family that was there. I remember at one point I was looking out the front window, and I saw a man walking down the street slowly and kind of looking at each house as he passed by. Then about 30 minutes later, I saw him walk by again, this time in the other direction. Over the next hour or so, I saw him walk by several other times. He seemed to be just walking back and forth down the street, wandering around. Eventually, somebody else there noticed and made a comment about it. Then he walked away once again, and I didn't see him for a while. Soon after that, it was time to eat, and afterwards, I went out to the yard to play football. It was just me playing football with myself because there were no other kids there, but I still liked to throw it around because my uncle had one of those mini trampolines. I would put it up against the fence as a target to throw at. I was practicing my throws when one of the balls bounced away to the side. When I went to get it, I saw it was next to a thick bush, and hiding in the bush was the bald man. I freaked out and ran all the way back inside, screaming. I ran to my parents and told them what had happened. They went outside, but the man was gone by then. My uncle looked around his yard, then walked up and down the street for a bit, but we figured the man had to be scared off. A few hours went by, and most people went home. It was just me and my parents and my aunt and uncle chatting in the kitchen. Then, out of nowhere, there was a knock at one of the back windows of my uncle's house. We looked just in time to see the man ducking down below the window. He then ran away. My uncle had had enough and he called the police. They showed up about 10 minutes later and were able to catch the man. He turned out to be on some sort of drugs and was walking around the neighborhood being creepy. I live in a 2-story house with my husband. The house is pretty old, but has a decent-sized attic up top. We don't really use the attic other than for storage, which really comes in handy for keeping the rest of our house clean. Last fall, I was going up to the attic to get some documents. I hadn't been up there for quite some time. I opened the latch in the ceiling and pulled down the staircase, which came down from the door in the ceiling all the way to the floor. I walked up, and when I got inside, I saw that some of the things in the attic seemed to be rearranged. We had quite a few boxes up there, as well as other junk, so that took up almost all the space in there, but I knew things weren't the way I had left them last time. It made me a little worried, but I thought maybe my husband had rearranged things up there for some reason. I knew this was likely the case, but as I was looking around in several of the boxes up there, I had a really uncomfortable feeling. The attic was actually kind of big, and I had to go all the way to the backside of it to find what I was looking for. I hurried up and got what I needed, then went back downstairs. I went straight to my husband and asked him if he had been in the attic recently. He casually said that he had been up there a couple of weeks ago. This made me feel a lot better, because I hadn't been up there in at least a few months. The next day, I went back up to the attic to put the documents back. Once I got up there, I went to the far end of the attic back to where the boxes where I kept them in were. I started to put them inside, and as I was doing this, I just barely heard my husband start to shout my name. I called out to him and asked what he wanted. He seemed to be frantically yelling my name. I turned and walked about 10 feet over to where I could see the entrance of the attic. I saw the door opening and my husband enter. He motioned to me to come over to him and was yelling at me. I ran over to him, but I was really confused. We both went back downstairs. He then got on the phone with police. I was shocked until my husband told me that after I had gone up into the attic, he said he entered the hallway to use the bathroom when he saw a man's arm reach down from the entrance of the attic. The arm then lifted up the staircase to the attic and closed the door. That's when my husband ran over and began calling my name. He said whoever did this was still in the attic. We left the house until the police arrived. They ended up finding a man who was hiding in the corner of the attic behind several boxes. They said he had likely been in there for a few days. It really gave me the creeps to know that I wasn't alone in there either time that I had been in the attic, and it wasn't my husband who had moved things around after all. I'm just really happy that my husband saw what was going on, or I don't know what would have happened to me. This is something that happened to me a few years ago. When I tell the story, most people still don't believe me, and I wouldn't have believed it myself if I wasn't there. It all started when I was traveling about halfway across the country to visit some of my family back home. I lived a few states away, and I liked driving back home instead of flying because it was always a fun drive through a beautiful part of the country. Anyways, I would usually have to stay 1 to 2 nights in a hotel depending on how long I drove. This time I was planning to stay 2 nights. Some of my friends had been using Airbnb a lot when they traveled, so for this time I decided to give it a try. I found this cool little house that was very affordable for me and looked to be almost in the woods. It had the feeling of a cabin, and when I got there I could see how isolated it really was. I arrived a little bit early, but it was still dark out, probably like 8 or 9 p.m. I got inside to see that it was a really nice place, but it also appeared to be pretty old. I basically just had some food and then got ready for bed. But the whole time I thought I could hear some noises coming from somewhere inside the house. I knew I was supposed to be the only person there, so I got a little bit concerned. It sounded very faint, but was almost like a tapping or a knocking. I figured it was something from outside, but once I got upstairs, I could hear it a lot better. It definitely sounded like someone was in the attic making noises. I thought it was probably a squirrel or maybe a mouse because of how this house was out in the wildlife. I did my best to ignore it. It would stop occasionally and then start up again. It would stop occasionally and then start up again. Sometimes it would be louder or faster, and then would slow back down or stop completely. I knew I was just staying there one night, so I got into bed and tried to fall asleep. The noises kept going though, and I found it difficult to relax. Then I thought I could just barely hear the sound of someone talking. I decided that for my own peace of mind, I would go up into the attic and take a look around to see what the noises was so I could finally relax and get some rest. I walked over to the hallway and found the latch for the attic. I opened it up, and with a chair I stood on it to see inside. As I was opening the latch, I could hear the noises starting up again. I looked inside, and what I saw next shocked me. About 10 feet away, there appeared to be a really short man tap dancing. He was wearing a suit and a tie and had a huge smile on his face. He then turned and looked at me, and as he did, he backed away and then seemed to just disappear. I think I went into shock for a few moments, but once my brain was finally able to compute what I had just witnessed, I immediately ran back downstairs, packed all of my stuff as quick as possible, and then left. I drove to a motel about 10 miles down the road and stayed there. Since it happened, I sometimes think I had to be dreaming or something, but I know that I wasn't. I've also never hallucinated or anything like that. It's something that will always puzzle me, but I know it sure creeps me out a lot. In December of 2020, I applied for a new apartment, deciding to move from my old one. The apartment that I applied for initially was leased to someone else before I could take my deposit in. I ended up getting the last apartment the management company had available. It was the same everything: design, price, owner, and area, but the difference was that the apartment numbers were different. I didn't apply for this particular apartment, so I didn't see it before signing the lease, but I did see the other one I applied for before being assigned this one. I walked into a complete mess of an apartment. The tub was rusted, the O-ring on the toilet was broken, causing a horrible odor to fill the apartment. The dryer connection was also clogged, so this caused the dryer to not even dry clothes. It also seemed like there was something growing through the hallway door, like a tree or something. This caused a hump in the floor. I complained daily to the management company and was in the midst of hiring an attorney, but after a month of complaints and calls to the management, in January of 2020, the management company offered me to change units. I agreed to move into the second unit, as it was up to my standard and in far better condition than Unit 2. I hired movers, set my deliveries to be delivered to the new unit, and my 18-year-old daughter and I started moving our few things I had from our old unit to the new one. The very first day after we spent the first night in the new unit, my daughter walked out to my car looking for something as we were preparing to leave for the day. I heard what sounded like rattling noises. I thought it was my daughter outside rattling the windows, trying to get my attention out of fear or an injury, so I began to walk to the front door. But then I realized the noise was coming from above my head. I stopped outside of my bedroom doorway and looked up, and the entry door to the attic was above my head, and it opened very wide. It was so wide that I looked straight up at the trusses in the roof, but I could not see who it was up there, so I yelled, "I don't know who you are, but I'm about to blow your brains out." Then I went and grabbed my gun off the dresser, and then the attic door slammed shut. The noise proceeded to go back the way it came, from the neighbor's side of the duplex. My daughter came back inside the house and saw me pacing with my gun in my hand and knew it was serious after taking one look at me. She asked me what was wrong, and I told her the story, so she urged me to call the police. I called 911 going along with her suggestion, and the sheriff came out and they stuck a mirror inside the attic. However, nothing was found in the attic, and they revealed that they had received a call exactly like that before, but in another unit. I knew it was my old unit I had just moved from because it had the latches on the attic door. The sheriff went to the neighbor's house and asked him, and he denied even being home at the time. I found that strange because it wasn't even 3 minutes later. Although I couldn't see who it was, I truly believe it was my neighbor. I'm just grateful that whoever it was decided to try it at the old unit and not the one we were at while we were asleep. I did not move, although I know I had the perfect grounds to break the lease and be done with this company and these apartments. But I had just spent over $2,800 with moving. I was exhausted at the thought of moving again. However, I had someone put in the same type of latches that the other unit had on the attic's door entry, and I called a security alarm company for an alarm system. I had a motion detector installed in the attic, and I also had a sensor put in the attic so that I'm notified if it's opened. This happened just last week. I was traveling back home after visiting some family for a few days. I lived about 6 hours away and had to drive through 3 different states to get back home. I left at about 9 a.m. and figured to get home at about 4 or 5. About an hour into the drive, I realized I was almost out of gas, so I stopped to fill up. As I did, I noticed a white car with a red stripe down the middle of it getting gas as well. When I was done, I left and went on with the drive. A while later, I noticed that the white and red car was right behind me. This wasn't a big deal at all, and as I went on with the drive, I was occasionally seeing it. I had to change roads a couple times, and the car remained behind me. It was starting to drive directly behind me constantly. When I would switch lanes, the car would immediately switch lanes as well. I looked to try to see who was driving. Whoever it was appeared to be wearing sunglasses and a hat, so I couldn't really tell, but it looked like a man. After I got about an hour from home, the car had still been following me almost the entire time, and it was starting to concern me. I decided to stop at the next exit there was to see if the car would stop as well. There was a rest stop, and I took the exit for it. When I did, the car continued to follow me and took the exit as well. I wasn't sure who it was or what they wanted. I didn't think I had cut them off or anything like that. I told myself it was probably just a coincidence. So I parked at the rest stop, and the car parked about 5 spots away. I waited to see if the driver would get out, but they didn't. After a little while, I decided to just leave, but as soon as I did, the car left as well. When I was leaving the parking lot to go back onto the freeway, the car got so close to me for a second I thought it might bump me. I kept driving until I got to the exit to where I lived was. At this point, I knew I was being followed, and I didn't want to go home, so I thought of the idea of going to the police station. I drove to my city and got to the police station about 10 minutes from my house. As I pulled in, the car also did. I sat in the parking lot of the police station, and the car parked about 10 spots away. After being there less than a minute, the car drove away. When it did, I got the idea to look at its license plate, but it was too late and I couldn't get a decent view of it. I waited in the parking lot for 10 more minutes before I finally left to go home. I looked behind me almost the whole time I was driving to make sure I wasn't being followed, and thankfully I wasn't. I finally got home and got inside. I thought at that point I would never see the car again, but I was wrong. I woke up in the middle of the night for seemingly no reason. I didn't hear any noise or anything. I was wide awake though, so I just took a glance out my window. Nothing was there. Then about 10 seconds later, I saw a car pull onto my usually quiet street. It was the same car that had been following me before. I knew it was the same car because of the red stripe it had, which is fairly uncommon. The car drove very slowly down my street. As it got to my house, I ducked down and hoped it wouldn't stop. It kept going and drove away past the end of my street and onto another one. I wasn't able to fall asleep for another hour. This was just last week, and I'm hoping the car doesn't come back. Five years ago, I worked in the city about 30 minutes from my house. I would make the drive to work every day on a highway for a good part of it. But one day, they decided to shut down a portion of the highway and repave part of it, so I would have to take some back roads to get to and from work for about a month. This was kind of annoying because it would take me an extra almost 10 minutes to get to work every day. One night, I was driving home from work, and it was about 11 p.m., a lot later than I usually worked. The roads were pretty empty though, so that was nice. I got to one of the back roads I would take, which had a bunch of thick woods on both sides of it. I would drive on this road for about a mile, but as soon as I turned onto it, I saw a car speeding up behind me. They were going much faster than me, and even though it was a one-lane road going each way, I figured they were going to go into the opposite traffic lane to pass me. I moved over a bit, but as they came to pass me, they stopped at my same speed and rolled down their window. I looked over and saw 2 men sitting in the front seats. They were waving their arms at me. I rolled down my window and heard them yell at me that my tire was flat. It took me a few seconds to understand what they were saying. Finally, I got it, and I pulled my car to the side of the road. It was strange because nothing felt off about my car. I came to a stop, and so did the men a short ways in front of me. I got out and began to look at all of my tires. The front ones were definitely not flat, so I walked to the back. As I did, I heard the men approaching. I looked closely at both tires, but neither of them were flat at all. I was confused. I walked back to the front of my car where one of the men was standing, blocking my driver's side door. He also appeared to be looking at my gauges inside my car. I said to the men that my tires were not flat. The other man, who was standing in front of my car, said to me he had to show me what was wrong and asked me to follow him. He started to walk to the back of my car. This whole thing was starting to seem really sketchy to me at this point, and I really didn't like the other man standing in front of my door like that. I started to walk to the back of the car, curious of what the man was going to say. I was almost there when I heard a lot of rustling in the woods. I looked expecting to see an animal, but saw two men emerging in masks. I ran back towards my driver's door and saw the man now standing there with a smile on his face and his arms out as if he was going to block me from entering my car entirely. I felt like I had been set up. I took 2 quick steps and then shoved the man as hard as I could. We were roughly the same size, and he went back and nearly fell over. It seemed like he wasn't expecting it at all. I took this chance to jump into my car and lock the doors immediately. Of course, the second after I did that, multiple doors tried to be opened by the men. I started the engine and put the car into drive. The man I had shoved attempted to stand in front of my car to block me from driving away. I had to drive slightly off the road and then got back onto the road to avoid hitting the man. Then I sped away. I figured the men would try to chase me, but they didn't. Once I got off of that road, I slowed down and made sure I wasn't being followed, then called the police. I don't know what the intentions of those men were. Maybe it was to try to rob me, but either way, it was a scary situation. This happened in Northwest Florida. It was in April of 2013 and a Sunday. My sister and I went to pick up my brother, whom was being released from prison. This was when inmates were being released at midnight instead of 7 a.m. The drive was 7 hours from where we lived, so we rented a car and we made it to town safely at 10 p.m. Central Time, which was an hour behind our time zone. My sister had to use the bathroom, so we were riding around in the car trying to locate an open business for her to use the bathroom in. I was driving and pulled up to a red light. I decided to make a left-hand turn, so I got into the left turning lane. As I pulled up to the light, there was a 1990s Ford F-150 in the straight lane. We were the only 2 vehicles at the light and on the road. The driver was a white male in his late 20s or early 30s. My sister and I looked over at him, but he sat there nervously biting his nails, never acknowledging our presence or looking our way. We thought it was sort of weird, especially being that we pulled up beside him and we were the only 2 cars out. The light turned green for us both, and he sped off from the light before we could even acknowledge the change of the light. So I proceeded with my left turn, and I began to drive down this long road that seemed endless. My sister and I are attentive, so as we were driving, we noticed lights behind us in our same lane, but we didn't give it much thought because they weren't close enough for us to be too concerned. After driving about 3 miles down the road, my sister and I agreed that this was an old-fashioned town, and everything closes at about 6 p.m. on Sundays in a town like it, so we needed to turn around. Although the decision for us to turn around wasn't sudden to us, it was sudden to the driver speeding behind us in our lane. I decided to make a U-turn at the next opening in the road, causing the driver behind us to take the other lane to keep from hitting us from behind. We looked to see who almost hit us, and it was the same 1990s Ford F-150 that was at the red light with us. The same car that took off before we realized the light was even green. We didn't know how he could have possibly gotten behind us so quickly, because we noticed the lights about 40 seconds after we turned, and we just watched him take off at the green light going straight and not the direction we had gone. My sister then asked me to just take her to the prison to wait for our brother to be released, so we went to the prison to get our brother. We didn't know who that guy was in the truck. The way everything transpired with him not acknowledging us, biting his nails nervously, and then speeding off as soon as the light changed was very creepy. I'm just thankful we didn't find out what he possibly had planned. About 5 years ago, my best friend asked me to watch her dogs for her while she went out of town for vacation. She was going away for a week and had 3 dogs. I know this is bad, but I don't know exactly what kind of dogs they are. They're a mix of a few breeds and are kind of small, but I'm not really a dog expert. Anyways, I got all the instructions on when to feed them and when to let them outside, even what time they usually went on their walks. I was happy to take care of them because my friend had her own small house and I had 2 roommates, so it was nice to get away on my own for a bit. The first day and night went great with no problems at all. It was really easy because the dogs are always really well behaved and trained. The second night though, after I had taken the dogs out for the final time of the day and was about to go to bed, I was upstairs and heard the dogs start to bark like crazy from down in the kitchen. I went down to see what it was. The dogs usually always stayed in the kitchen, where their bowls were, and even though they were well trained, they had a divider put up between the living room at night just to be safe. When I got down there, I saw that the dogs were jumping up and down and going wild. I went over and looked out the back door, but didn't see anything outside. Then I realized that I hadn't locked the door, so I quickly locked it and then tried to calm down the dogs. They must have seen some sort of animal or something is what I was thinking, because they usually didn't bark so much. Finally, I was able to calm them down and they were quiet again. I went back upstairs and laid down to go to sleep. I fell asleep for a little while, but woke up again not much later to the sound of the dogs barking again. I went downstairs and saw them once again jumping up and down and barking. I looked around outside and still couldn't see anything. I watched the dogs, noticed that they weren't necessarily barking at the back door, but more so at the closet door that was inside and next to it. I got a bad feeling about this, but I decided to open the closet door. I walked closer and I knew it would be empty, but I just wanted to open it for peace of mind. I got to the handle, and just when I was about to grab it, I saw it start to turn on its own. This caused me to back up and immediately run upstairs. I got into the bedroom and locked the door behind me. I heard the sound of someone walking downstairs and the dogs start to go crazy once again. Then I heard footsteps start to come upstairs. At that point, I took out my phone and I called the police. I ran to the far corner of the room and talked to them. The footsteps came up the stairs, but I never heard anyone try to open the door to the room I was in. After the police let me know they would be on their way, I listened closely, but I didn't hear any more noises. I didn't dare move and I kept silent. It felt like forever that I was sitting there listening for any kind of noises, and I fully expected whoever was there to try to come in the room, but the entire time I waited there and I heard nothing. I knew the person had to be upstairs still, because if they went back downstairs it would likely set the dogs off again. Finally, I heard the sounds of police arriving coming from downstairs. They made their way into the house through the back door and the dogs started barking once again. The police went upstairs and I unlocked the bedroom I was in for them. Then I left the house as they searched the rest of it. After they were done searching the house, they said they couldn't find anybody inside at all. I even went inside with them to search again, but there was nobody in there. I don't know whoever was there because I never saw them, but I really don't know how they left. This happened when I was 18. My grandmother was going out of town for a couple of days and asked if I would watch her place and take care of her plants while she was gone. She had a large plant collection, and I was probably into plants almost as much as her, which is likely why she asked me. I had been to her place many times before. It was about 5 miles away from my house, but a little closer in the city. It was a very small house, with pretty much just a bedroom, living room, bathroom, and kitchen. The first day, I got there and took care of all the plants that she had. After that, I didn't really do a whole lot for the rest of the day. That night, though, as I was laying in bed and about to fall asleep, I just happened to look out the bedroom window. In the bedroom, the window was right there on top of the bed basically, and you could see right outside. I saw a man walk right past me on the other side of the window, literally within a foot of my head. It really freaked me out and I sat up in bed and looked out the window. Whoever this guy was, he didn't really seem to notice me at all and kept on walking towards the front of the house. I watched him, and he stopped in front of the living room window about 15 feet away from me. I ducked down, but he didn't even look in my direction. I couldn't tell much about the man because of how dark it was, other than that he was wearing a hood and had a backpack with him. I watched him reach into the backpack and then strike the living room window with something, and I heard glass breaking at that point. All I could think to do was get under the bed and hide. I crawled under and covered the side of the bed with a blanket. I heard the man walk around inside and go towards the kitchen. Once he was inside the house for about a minute, I knew hiding under the bed wasn't the best place, and I had the strong urge to leave, so without hesitating, I got out from under the bed and tried to open the bedroom window. I opened it very slowly and carefully, trying not to make a sound. I could hear the man still seemed to be in the kitchen at this point. I knew I'd have about 15 seconds if he decided to walk this way, so I started to hurry up. Finally, I was able to get it open, and I climbed out the window, and once I was outside, ran to my car that was parked in the driveway. I got inside as fast as I could and drove all the way back home. It wasn't until then when I told my parents everything, and then they called the police. I feel really dumb that I didn't call the police sooner, because when they arrived at the house, the man was completely gone. He had stolen a few things, but I don't believe he was ever caught. This happened a few years ago. My friend Jeremy had just moved into a new house that he was going to be temporarily living in for a few months. It wasn't all that far from me, which I was excited about, but he told me just after about a week of living there that he couldn't take it anymore and he wanted to move out. He said the house was really creeping him out and weird things kept happening. I wasn't really buying it, and he told me I should just stay in the house for myself. I agreed, so we decided to swap places for a few days. I was really skeptical of whatever Jeremy was afraid of and figured he just had mice or something like that. I got to his house and saw that it was pretty old looking and not in the greatest of shape. Jeremy showed me around a little bit and then left. I found it funny at the time how afraid he seemed to be of the house. After he left, I was confident that nothing would scare me. I hung out for a bit and nothing strange happened at all. It wasn't until nighttime when I was headed upstairs when I heard what sounded like a large crash of things coming from the basement. It was extremely loud, so I headed downstairs to the basement to take a look. I got down there and flicked on the light and didn't see anything out of place. There wasn't really anything down there at all, just a few boxes, but they hadn't fallen over. Still, I figured there was an explanation and I went back upstairs, but I couldn't help but be a little bit creeped out. It was pretty late at that point, and I got ready for bed and was just about to fall asleep when I heard the distinct sound of scratching coming from the bedroom window. I opened my eyes and looked over to the window. The scratching stopped and I saw nothing. I went over to the window and looked outside of it. It was on the second floor of the house, so I don't know who would be able to reach it from up there, and there were no tree branches or anything scraping it. At this point, I was officially spooked. I really didn't think anything strange was going to happen when I got there, but now I saw why Jeremy was so creeped out by this place. I immediately left and got in my car and drove all the way back to my place and slept on the couch for the night. Jeremy ended up staying at my place for a few days until he was able to get in line with another house and move out. I don't know what was up with that place. A couple of years back, I used to work at a library. It was kind of my summer job when I was back home from college. It was an old and relatively quiet library that was on the edge of town and about 10 minutes away from my house. One night, I was asked to work late past closing time because we had a lot of organizing that we needed to do. Once we were closed, I became the only person working there. This was the first time I had been there all alone, and it was kind of cool. And I figured it would only take me about an hour to get the rest of the stuff done. I began taking the cart of books around and putting them on the shelves that they belonged to. About 10 minutes into this, I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I really couldn't tell what it was, and when I looked in the direction that I saw it coming from, there was nothing. I figured it was a fly or something like that. But that's when I saw between the bookshelves a person walking. There were several spaces in between where books were, which allowed you to see through the bookshelves. There wasn't enough space at all to see exactly who the person was, but I could just tell that there was a person. Nobody was supposed to be in here but me. I was sure that the library had been completely empty, but I suddenly got a nervous feeling, so I called out hello to whoever was there. I got no reply, so I just told them that we were closed and said they needed to leave. I was hoping this would get whoever it was to at least come out, but they didn't. The more it was silent, the more nervous I got. Whoever it was seemed to be hiding from me. I stood there not really knowing what to do for a few minutes. Then I saw movement again. This time it was at another aisle of shelves that was on the other side of the room. I had no idea how they could have gotten there without me seeing. I wanted to get out of there, but whoever it was, I would have to walk by the aisle that they were in to get to the exit. I went into another row of bookshelves that was farther away from the person. I sat there listening for noise and trying to decide how I was going to get out of there. I thought about calling my boss who had gone home, but I knew with how quiet it would make a ton of noise. Just then, I noticed something directly on the other side of the bookshelf I was facing. It was a face staring at me between two books. The person was now on the other side of the shelf. It was the most scared I had ever been in my life. I jumped up and ran for the exit. I fully expected whoever it was to chase me, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. But when I passed the row they were in, they were just gone. There was nobody there in the aisle. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but nevertheless, I ran all the way out of there and called my boss as soon as I got outside. He arrived about 15 minutes later as I waited in my car with all the doors locked. He went inside and looked around. He came back a while later and said that he didn't see anybody in there at all, and whoever it was must have left. I never stayed late after that and quit the job at the end of the summer. I've been able to mainly work from home for my job for the past couple of years. It has a lot of good benefits for me. But one day, as I was in the middle of an important workday, the Wi-Fi in my apartment building went completely out. I first tried the hotspot on my phone, but I soon found out that the signal on it was much too weak for me to get done the things that I needed to do. I decided to go down to the library that was nearby and use their Wi-Fi. There was one that was pretty close by, and when I got there, the library was pretty quiet. I sat in the corner where there were some desks and a few other people working. I began getting my work done just as I would at home. Sometime later, I saw a man walk over and approach me. I didn't recognize him, but he looked to be a little bit older than me and overall seemed pretty average. I took out my headphones and he said hi to me. He then asked me if I remembered him. I looked hard at him for a few seconds, and I knew for a fact that I had never seen him before. "No, I'm sorry," I said. "Do I know you from something?" The man acted surprised and said he couldn't believe it. Then he laughed and just said okay and shook his head. I said maybe he was mistaking me for someone else, but the man shook his head and said no. Then he stood there just kind of looking at me for a few seconds before turning and walking away. It was strange, but I just went back to work. A short time later, though, I noticed that the man was just sitting at a table across from the room watching me. He didn't seem to be really doing anything. He didn't have any books and he wasn't on a computer or anything like that. It made me a little uncomfortable, but I had work to do, so I did my best to just ignore it and focus on my computer. Finally, a while later, I noticed that he was gone. I looked all around the room to make sure and was happy to see that he was, in fact, not in there anymore. I worked about another hour and then was finally done for the day. I packed up my laptop and the rest of my things and left to go back to my car. When I was in the parking lot approaching my car, I saw there was another car parked rather close to mine, and in the driver's seat was the man I had spoken with earlier. I felt really uncomfortable when I saw this. He was just sitting in the driver's seat of his car looking at me. I kept my eyes on my car and thought about going back into the library, but decided that would be too weird and to just get to my car and drive away. I unlocked my car and opened the door when I got there. I got inside and was just getting in when I heard the man's door unlock and start to open. I hurried to get in and close my doors and start my engine. As I was starting it, I heard the man knock on my window several times. I turned and looked at him and saw he was motioning for me to roll down my window. I didn't really want to, but I did just to crack. The man asked me where I was going, but seemed to have an angrier tone this time. He then said to me, "Yeah, I don't really know you, so what?" He then reached and opened my door, and I tried to pull it shut, but it got away from me. All I could think to do was drive away. I put the car into drive and sped out of the parking lot. The man let go when I did and ran for his car. I was quick to leave and make a few sharp turns, and I don't believe the man followed me because I never saw him again. One thing I'm sure of is never to go back to that library. The next day I reported the incident, but I still don't feel safe going back there. This happened to me way back when I was 16. I was working a job at the desk of my local library, helping people check out books and return them. It was a fairly small library, so there would usually be just one or two of us working at once. One Saturday, I had the opening shift, so I got there early in the morning and made sure things were in order before getting ready to open the doors. I got to my desk and started up the computer when I heard a loud crashing noise coming from the back of the library. It really startled me, and I knew it had to be done by a person, but nobody was supposed to be in the library at this time. I got really quiet and listened. I didn't hear anything for a while, so I decided I had to go check it out. As I was walking over there, I was convincing myself that it was really nothing, but when I made it around the corner to the back end of the library, I saw what looked like a homeless man hiding behind a bookshelf which had fallen over. I froze when I saw this because I really wasn't expecting it. The man then locked eyes with me and all of a sudden got up and began charging at me. He was about 30 feet away, so I turned and ran as fast as I could to get out of the library. But I realized how quickly the man was coming at me and didn't think I would be able to make it out. I turned to the bathrooms and ran inside them. They were individual rooms that locked, so I figured I would be safe in there. I was just able to make it in and lock the door before the man followed. He tried getting in and then started pounding on the door and yelling. I took out my phone and called the police and told them the situation. They told me they would arrive in under 10 minutes, and after I did, I screamed to the man I had called the police and they were on their way. That seemed to work because he walked away and I didn't hear any more noises. I remained in the bathroom waiting for police to get there. After about probably 5 minutes, but felt like a lot longer, I thought about leaving the bathroom, but decided not to just to be safe. A short time later, I heard the police arrive, and eventually they got to the bathroom and I came out. What they told me when I came out was when they arrived, they saw the man hiding around the corner of the bathrooms with a piece of wood in his hands as if he was waiting to attack me. I'm very glad I stayed hiding in there and didn't come out. I work at a museum and have been working there for about 6 months now. It's a really old art museum that's really nice, and it's also fairly big. My job is overnight maintenance, and there's usually about 3 of us that work on the overnights. With it being a big museum, it requires a lot of cleaning and a lot of maintenance to certain exhibits. We have to make sure that they're in the best shape for the visitors. One night, about 2 months ago, I was working and everything was going pretty normal. I took care of things in a couple of rooms, and then it was time for my break. I went into the museum break room, and because there were only a few of us working at the time, when we took our breaks, we would be the only people in the break room. I went inside and started to eat a sandwich. Not even 5 minutes later, I heard a loud knocking coming from the break room door. It was really loud and fast, as if someone really needed to get inside. I got up and walked over to the door and opened it, even though it wasn't locked or anything like that. But when I opened the door, nobody was there. The knocking had literally been going on a second before I opened it. I thought maybe one of my coworkers was playing a prank on me, even though they weren't really the type of people to do that. Then I remembered how I had heard some rumors that our museum was haunted. I had dismissed them though, thinking people just said that because the place was really old. I I went back inside the break room, but this time I propped the door open. There was no more knocking, but I heard the sound of someone stomping down the hallway about 10 minutes later. I walked over to once again find nothing there. After that, I went back to work feeling a little creeped out for the rest of the night. The next month or so went by, and I didn't really experience anything strange, other than occasionally hearing random noises, but nothing too crazy. Then, just last week, I was working in one of the rooms with a higher ceiling. I was changing some of the light bulbs, so I had to be on a ladder. I was pretty high up on the ladder, I would say about 20 feet above the ground. As I changed the light bulb, all of my attention was on unscrewing it. As I was doing so, I heard footsteps come into the room. I decided to finish replacing the bulb and then see who was there. I once again expected it to be a coworker, so I even called out "What's up" as I heard them coming in. They didn't respond to me though. Then I heard and felt the ladder that I was on get kicked from the bottom and start to move. The ladder started to shake and nearly fell over. I came extremely close to falling all the way down to the floor. It caused me to lose my balance and slip, but I caught myself on the ladder a little bit farther down. The ladder was able to stabilize and stop shaking. I did, however, drop the light bulb, which hit the floor below and broke. Once I regained my composure, I looked down to see nobody there at all. I got down from the ladder immediately and walked around until I found one of my coworkers. I told them what had happened. They seemed surprised, and the three of us replaced the light bulb so nothing else would happen. That was only a week ago, and I've been seriously considering quitting ever since. The last incident could have really injured me, and I have no idea how to explain it. A couple of years ago, I went to a museum with my history class as a field trip. It was my freshman year of college and a popular history class in that school. We met up on campus and everyone in the class, along with the professor, took a bus to a museum that was about 10 minutes away. It was a lot bigger of a museum than I expected, and the professor led us around for a while and talked, then eventually let us go our own ways for the rest of the time. I walked towards the first part of the museum with my friend in the class named Skylar. There were some really cool sort of outdoor exhibits that we wanted to see again. It took us a while to get back there, and the museum was so big that we almost got lost a few times. It had a lot of connecting rooms with a dark ceiling and dark background that really made you feel like you were a part of the exhibits. When we walked over, we saw a man in the room. He was the only other person in that area, but I didn't really pay him any attention. However, as soon as we got in the room, the man seemed to walk away, but he walked to an area that clearly said nobody was allowed in, and he seemed to sort of go into a back room. As far as I knew, he didn't work there, because the people who worked at the museum wore blue shirts, and this man was in black. It seemed a little bit strange. About 10 minutes later, shortly before we were all supposed to go back to leave, Skylar and I saw the man again. He appeared in the room again, but this time we were in a different room. He came out of another door that led to a back room. He stood there for a second, just staring at us. I pretended not to notice him and looked away, but I could tell that he was still staring. I was pretty confident that this guy didn't work at the museum, and the way he was staring at us was giving me a bad feeling. We decided to walk out of the room to another one, and as we started, it looked like the man was going to walk over to us. He had been about 30 feet away, so we were able to leave the room before he came close. After that, we quickly walked out of the other room we were in and turned the corner to another one. Like I said, it was a museum that was sort of easy to get lost in, and we didn't want to talk to the guy, so we moved from room to room until we had made it back to where most of the other people were. I saw the professor, and he was starting to tell people that we would be leaving. We waited there for a couple of minutes as everyone made their way back to that room. Then I saw two people who worked at the museum come into the room and announce that the museum was going on a lockdown. Everyone was quickly brought back to our group, and we were walked to a nearby room and had to wait there with all the doors closed. It took about 20 minutes, but the lockdown was eventually lifted, and we were able to get back to the bus and go back to campus. I was told afterwards that the same man we had seen had attacked a worker in the museum and ran off. It really freaks me out when I sometimes think of what the man possibly had planned for us when he was walking towards Skylar and I. This happened my senior year of high school. I'm a 25-year-old woman now, so this was 7 years ago. We were going on a class field trip to an art museum in one of my art classes. It was on a day that I was sick though, so I wasn't able to make it. I didn't really care that I missed it until I saw that there was one of those fill-in-the-blank assignments that the class did while they were there. The museum wasn't that far away from the school, so the teacher said if I went on my own time to do the assignment, I could get a pass with the school and get in for free. That way I would be able to make it up. I took my grades very seriously, so I decided to go on the next Saturday morning. I got to the museum shortly after it opened to get it out of the way and start with the assignment. The assignment was pretty much asking things about each exhibit and some of the art pieces as well as the artists that created them. It was a long assignment, and I was happy to get there so early because the museum was pretty dead, which allowed me to take my time and get everything done. About halfway through though, I noticed a man come into the area that I was in and just stare at me. It was probably about 10 seconds straight, and enough to make me feel very uncomfortable. I walked away to another area and didn't see him again for about 10 minutes. That's when I was at a lower point of the museum, and there was a place about 40 feet above that could overlook the place I was in. I looked up and noticed the man standing alone at the top, once again staring at me. I didn't look at him much, but when I did, he smiled and gave me a hand gesture to come over to him. I wasn't going to do that, and I once again walked away. He looked to be at least 50 and had really messy hair and a scraggly beard. I hurried up with the rest of my assignment, and at the very last part of it, the man seemed to just follow me everywhere I went. I thought about reporting him to the museum staff, but I didn't think he was anything more than just a creepy guy that I could ignore, and there wouldn't be a problem. I just didn't want to make more of things than I needed to, so I did my best to finish up the assignment that had 50 questions. It took me about an hour to complete, but finally I was done. The man had seemed to stop following me, which was nice, and I left the art museum for my car. As soon as I unlocked it though, I saw the man come out from underneath my car. As soon as I saw him, I thought I was having a heart attack. He immediately lunged at me, and I jumped back to the side and barely missed him. I ran all the way back inside the museum as fast as I could. When I got inside, the man didn't follow me in. I saw one of the staff members and told them to call the police and explained everything. I waited there until the police arrived, but when they did, the man was gone. I had to answer a lot of questions, and my parents came down to the museum as well a short time later. I was fine, but the experience did shake me up a little bit. The part that really creeps me out is how the man knew exactly which car was mine. That tells me he had been watching me long before I even got to the museum. Many years ago, when I was a kid, I used to go sledding with my younger brother every time it snowed. There was a hill at a park a few blocks away, and we could walk to it. Every time it snowed, we would go there, and all the kids from the neighborhood would go to it as well. One year, when I was about 10, me and my little brother, who was 2 years younger than me, noticed it was snowing out. It was already nighttime, but as it was a Friday, we knew the next day our local hill would be packed with kids, so we asked our mom if we could go that night. I don't know exactly what time it was looking back, but I'd guess it was about 7 or 8 o'clock. Our mom said we could, but we had to be back within an hour. My brother and I got on our winter coats and snow pants and took our sleds to the hill. It took maybe 10 minutes for us to walk to the park, and as we were walking, the snowfall got heavier and heavier. By the time we got there, it was really coming down, and we saw that there was nobody else at the park at all. The hill was getting coated in fresh snow. My brother and I raced up to the top and then slid down. It was great to have the whole park to ourselves, sliding down and going back up over and over again. One of the times when we reached the top of the hill, we noticed a man standing towards the bottom of it. He was really far away, but he appeared to just be staring at us. It was kind of weird to see an empty park at night in the middle of a blizzard with just one man standing at the bottom of a hill staring. My brother and I decided to wait for a minute or so to see if he would go away before we slid down the hill again.
kept standing there for at least a minute or so, maybe 2, and finally walked about 20 feet away and sat on a park bench, but continued to watch us. My brother and I were naturally taught to be careful of strangers, and the guy was seeming suspicious. We decided to slide down the hill one more time and then leave the park to go home. When we got to the bottom, I saw a closer look of the man. He seemed sort of old, but I couldn't make out much else in the snowfall and him wearing a big coat. My brother and I then walked out of the park and left. We walked home in the snow for roughly the 10-minute walk. When we made it back home, we got back inside and had some hot chocolate. After that, we got ready for bed. As I was going down the hallway from the bathroom to my bedroom, I noticed something out the window. The man who we had seen at the park was standing at the edge of our yard on the street, staring at our house. I called my brother over, and just after he got there, we watched the man walk away. He didn't get into a car or anything, he just walked down the street. But after that, he was never seen again. A couple of years ago, I was going on a long road trip for work, which I did quite often with my old job. It was wintertime, and as I drove down the road late at night, I noticed it start to snow. Pretty soon, it was a heavy snowfall that was sticking on the ground and causing the road to become very slippery and dangerous to drive on. I hadn't really been paying attention to the weather, but I knew at this point it would be dangerous to continue. I decided to pull off the freeway at the next stop, hoping there would be some hotels or something. Unfortunately, there were none, and the next stop was just a truck stop. I pulled into it off the freeway anyways, and saw a decent amount of trucks and other cars there. The place was starting to get busy from all the snow and the people getting off the roads. I went around and parked in an open parking spot, and decided to just sleep there and wait out the snow. It was a busy road I had been on, so I figured it would get plowed overnight. I went inside the truck stop to use the bathroom, and then walked back out to my car. As I did, I could already see almost an inch of snow had fallen onto my car. I got into my car and began covering up my windows. I did the same thing for whenever I slept in my car. I covered all the windows with certain blankets that I had, so nobody could see in the car at all. Then I laid in the back seats of my car, which was just long enough for me to lay down in. I had several other blankets that I had in back with me, so I wasn't too worried about getting cold. I closed my eyes, and it didn't take long for me to fall asleep, but I woke up sometime in the middle of the night. I had no idea what time it was. I'd been sleeping well, so I knew something had woken me up. I couldn't see out of any of my windows because of the blankets. Then I heard the sound of a scratching coming from the outside of my car. It got louder and louder. It sounded like it was on my driver's side. It stopped for a minute, but eventually I heard someone try to open the driver's door to my car. I wasn't quite sure what to do because nothing like this had ever happened before. I laid there for about a minute as whoever was there tried to enter my car, testing out each door one at a time. I was really happy that my car was locked. I looked at my phone and thought about calling the police. It was 4:30 in the morning. Then the noises stopped, until suddenly I heard a loud bang come from the back window next to me. Thankfully, the window didn't break, but I thought it might, so I jumped and got into the driver's seat and started the car. I pulled the blanket off the window and drove away. I could feel myself sliding in the snow as I did. I looked in my mirror and saw someone, but couldn't make out anything about them. It was snowy and dark, and they were a good 30 feet behind me. I kept driving back onto the road, which was not as slippery as it had been before, but it was still lightly snowing. I slowly and carefully drove up about 20 miles to a town with a hotel and slept there the rest of the night. This happened when I was 15. I was a sophomore in high school and got home from school one afternoon in December to realize I was home alone. I saw a note on the counter from my mom saying that her and my dad were going shopping and would be back later that night. She left me some money to order a pizza, which I was pretty excited about. I did my homework, then ordered the pizza and watched TV. Then I played some video games. It had been snowing earlier in the day, and by the time it was 7 p.m., it was really coming down. I kept playing video games, and finally at about 9, my mom called me telling me she was on her way home, but might not be there for another hour or so because of the snow. I decided to go outside and look to see just how much we had gotten. I was also going to maybe shovel the driveway. I stepped out the front door to see several inches of fresh snow everywhere. It was so smooth, except for this one place. I noticed some footprints in the snow that were in my yard. There seemed to be someone who walked in my yard and then went over to the garage. It was strange to me. There usually weren't people walking in my yard. I went back inside and suddenly had the thought to check the garage door, which was connected to our house. I went over to it and saw that it was unlocked. I started to walk closer to lock it, but thought I heard a noise right from the other side of it. This really freaked me out, and I ran upstairs to my room. I locked my door and hid under my bed. About a minute later, I heard the noise of my garage door opening. I wanted my parents to get home badly, but knew they wouldn't be home for almost an hour. I heard the sounds of someone walking around downstairs in my house. At that point, I decided to call the police. Thankfully, I had my phone on me, and I dialed 911. I spoke as quietly as I could, and hoped whoever was downstairs didn't hear me. I could barely hear them walking around downstairs, and I heard them walking around for quite a while. I had no idea what they were doing, but I was kicking myself for not making sure the garage door was locked earlier. I sat upstairs under my bed until I started to hear the footsteps coming up the stairs. It was the most scared I had ever been, until finally I heard the sound of police sirens off in the distance. The footsteps then went back downstairs and seemed to leave. I waited until the police came inside my house to leave my bedroom. When I did, I saw the main level of our house was all messed up. My parents were called and got home a little bit later. It seemed like just a typical break-in of a guy trying to find valuables in our house. I'm just glad I was able to get upstairs and call the police when I did.
A few years ago, I took a business trip to Atlanta. I would occasionally fly around the country for my job. Not a whole lot, but maybe 3 or 4 times a year. I was in Atlanta for about a week, and then had a flight back home. I landed at my home airport at about 9 p.m., and once off the plane, I made my way through the airport over to the baggage claim. I slept on the flight, so I was a little groggy as I stood there with the other people waiting for the bags. There was a lot of people that had been on the flight, so there were quite a few bags there. I waited for a while, and eventually looked up and noticed that I thought I saw my bag. But a man grabbed it almost immediately and started to open it up and walk away. I walked closer to see if it was really mine, and I was soon able to recognize that in fact it was. I approached the man and told him that that was my bag. He handed it to me and said sorry, and then quickly walked away. I took it and was finally able to leave the airport and go back home. I got in my car in the parking lot which I had left there, and drove home, which was about a 15-minute drive. Once I was home, I decided to unpack my things and then go straight to bed. I opened up my bag to see a strange piece of paper folded in half that was on top of all my clothes. I picked it up and unfolded it. In big handwriting, the note said, "See you at home." I suddenly got the creeps remembering the man who had picked up my bag. I wondered if this note was left by him. Was the note meant for me, or had he thought the bag was somebody else's? Or maybe it was all just a stupid joke. Nevertheless, I suddenly had a bad feeling, and suddenly felt the need to check outside of all of my windows to make sure the surroundings were clear. I looked out of the front window and saw a car pulling up slowly on the side of the road across the street. I didn't recognize the car at all. I ducked down and watched as the car came to a stop and then the engine turned off. It was way too dark and also too far for me to be able to see who was inside the car. I watched for probably 2 minutes straight. Finally, the driver's door opened. A man got out, and I couldn't tell for sure, but it very well could have been the same man from the airport, because what I remember of his physical description, it was about the same. But then again, it was really too dark to tell for sure.
As soon as I noticed him walking into my front yard, I pulled the blinds down completely and got out my phone ready to call the police. I ran to the back end of the house to my bedroom and waited. Everything got really silent for about a minute. Then I heard the noise of something scraping against the back door of my house. It took me by surprise because I wasn't expecting whoever it was to go to the back. I got up quickly and then ran to the front end of my house. The noises kept going, and I got ready to dial the police. But as soon as I opened up my phone, I heard the back door suddenly swing open. I paused in dialing and ran to the front door, which was thankfully only about 5 feet away. I ran outside from my car and got inside and started it. Then I drove away. After I started driving, I called the police. I drove around the neighborhood until I received a call saying the officers had arrived at my house. Then I went back. They looked around, but sadly the man and his car were both gone. The back door to my house had been broken open, but nothing in the house was missing or damaged. I told them everything I could, but I don't think they were ever able to find the man. The scariest part was a few weeks later I received a letter on my front step with no return address on it. When I opened it up, there was another note folded in half saying, "Why did you run away?" I immediately took the letter to the police. Thankfully, I moved for work about a month after that and never received any more letters or notes. I just hope whoever that was never bothers me again. To this day, I still don't know how he found my address or knew exactly which bag was mine. In 2019, I was taking a 10-hour road trip to visit my family who lives in Baltimore. I drove there several times a year and would often do the drive all at once. That year, I was planning on leaving right after I got out of work and driving the whole ways, which would cause me to arrive pretty late at night. When the day came, I drove for as long as I could, but eventually I got really sleepy and couldn't go on any longer. It was only 10 p.m., but I had been up since 5:30 in the morning for work. I decided to just pull off and take a quick 1-hour nap, then finish the drive because I was only about 2 hours away. I pulled off on what appeared to be a little rest stop. As I did, I was barely able to keep my eyes open. I saw a sign that said the rest stop building was closed, but there was still an empty little parking lot, so I parked my car on the end, leaned my seat back, and fell asleep almost immediately. I'm not sure exactly how long I was out for, but I know I was woken up at some point not too long after that. I heard what sounded like something on top of my car. It was pretty strange to say the least, and I stopped and listened. I felt the car almost move as if something was on top. Then I heard a quiet sound from above the roof. I looked around out my window without opening it, but couldn't really see anything. Then I saw what appeared to be a man's arm reaching down from the rear window of my car. This spooked me and I started my engine right away. When my engine started, I saw a man jump off the right side of my car and sprint away into the woods that was directly in front of my car past about 20 feet of grass. He ran into the woods until I could no longer see him. I was really freaked out at what I had witnessed. I looked around the parking lot to see if there was another car or anything like that, but it was completely empty besides me. Then I saw the man return and appear in front of my headlights emerging from the woods. This time he had a large stick in his hand and it was raised up as if he was going to use it as a weapon. He was headed straight for my car, so I wasted no time in quickly backing out of my parking spot and driving away. I suddenly wasn't so sleepy anymore and drove the rest of the way to Baltimore. Back when I was in high school, I took a trip one summer to California with my parents. We took a flight that landed at about 11 a.m. in the West Coast time. Once we got off the flight, we decided to take an Uber to the hotel that we had been reserved to stay at. The hotel was really nice. It wasn't a 5-star place or anything like that, but it was a good quality hotel that was clean and had everything you needed. We got into the room and set down our bags, then started talking about finding a place to eat. We were there for maybe 20 or 30 minutes, and I was sitting on the bed closest to the door when all of a sudden my foot bumped into something. It felt strange, and I looked down to the side of the bed to see a man hiding under the bed, laying on the floor with a blanket covering him. I was shocked, and as he was revealed, he stood up. My parents looked over and were just as surprised as me. The man then said in a loud voice for nobody to move. When he did this, it really scared me. The man seemed to be pretty angry, but then he just walked out of the room and left. He was tall but really skinny and had on pretty dirty clothes. When he was gone, we called the front desk and reported the incident. They apologized and even called the police. They also offered a refund to us in a new room. The man had ran away by the time anything could be done, but we were just happy he was gone.
I've always gone out shopping on Black Friday for many years now. But 2 years ago was by far the scariest experience I've ever had. It was Thanksgiving Day, and I was excited to go buy a new TV. I was planning on going to Target for a big sale they were having on electronics, and they were opening at 6 p.m. on Thanksgiving night. I was at my parents' place, and they had over quite a few of our family members from my mom's side of the family. I chatted with all of them, and then had dinner with everyone. Then I left their house to Target to go buy a giant TV. I arrived at Target about 20 minutes before they opened. I saw that there was already a decent-sized line of people waiting to get inside. It wasn't too long though, and I figured I still had a decent chance of getting the TV I wanted. I got out of my car and went to the back of the line, and as I did, I saw a few other people get in line behind me. I waited in line for the remaining minutes until I saw the doors to Target being unlocked. I watched as people started to go inside, then I walked quickly with everyone else, and once I got inside, I made a beeline for the electronics department. The store was really crowded, and it was hard to get through everyone, but I was able to make it there in a few minutes without running into anyone or anything like that. I got to the TVs to see a few people had already grabbed the size and brand that I had wanted, which was 50 inches. I walked quickly over to them, and just as I did, I saw another person grab one to reveal that there was just one more left behind it. I quickly reached out and got the last one. I was so happy to actually have it in my hands, because I had been pretty nervous I wouldn't be able to get it. I knew how quickly they would sell out. Probably 2 or 3 seconds after I had gained full control of it, someone came from my right side and grabbed the TV that I had in my arms. It started to come out of my hands until I grabbed it and pulled it back. At that point, the person shoved me a little bit and I almost gave up the TV. I turned and saw a man wearing a blue coat and a slight beard. He was looking at me, and as we made eye contact, he said that I had his TV. I said sorry to the man, but I had gotten the last one. The man started to turn and walk away, but then did a 360 turn and came back to me. He then asked me if I could please give it to him. I really didn't want to, and I said no, I'm sorry. He then told me how he would have got to the TV sooner, but somebody had gotten in his way. Then he added he thought he had got to the TV before me as well. I knew the man was behind me and I had got to it before him. He had tried to take it out of my hands after I already had it. I didn't want to cause a scene, but I wasn't going to give up the last TV to him, so I told him sorry one last time and started towards the check lanes. The man followed me all the way there, trying to reason with me. The more we walked, the angrier he became. It came to the point where I just started to ignore him. I finally got to the check lane, and he cursed at me and walked away. I checked out and walked my TV to my car in the parking lot and loaded it up. But as I was putting my TV in my car, I saw the man start to approach me once again. This time I got a bad feeling. It was a different environment out in the parking lot where there were less people around. I hurried up as fast as I could and then shut the door. The man was standing there from about 20 feet away, flipping me off. Then he got into a car that was parked nearby. I ignored him, and I actually felt kind of bad for the guy because I knew how great of a deal I was getting on the TV, but I also knew I didn't owe it to him to give him the last one. I started up my car and began to drive away. I drove back to my house to drop off the TV. My house was close to the Target, as well as my parents' house. As I turned onto my street, I noticed a car turn behind me. Then, as I was pulling into my driveway, I saw the car stop in front of my driveway. I got a terrible feeling. The car then started to honk,
I looked and saw the man from Target yelling something out his window. Then he sped away in his car. I was glad he was gone, but I was a little concerned that he now knew where I lived. The man seemed to be a little crazy to get so worked up over a TV. I brought my TV in the house, then I locked it up and went back to my parents for the rest of Thanksgiving. I stayed there until about 10 p.m., then drove back to my place. When I got there, I just felt suspicious. I was worried the guy had tried to break into my house or something when I was gone, but I figured I was just being paranoid. I looked around for my car at my place and everything seemed fine, so I got out and headed for the front door. But as I made it to about 10 feet from my door, I noticed something. I had a couple of pillars in front of my house, and behind the side of the right pillar, I saw what appeared to be an arm. I knew who it had to be. I wanted to run away, but didn't want to make it obvious. I quickly stopped in my tracks, but said, "Forgot my phone," to myself. I was hoping this would work. Then I turned around and started walking back to my car calmly. The man seemed to buy it, and I wanted badly to run to my car, but I decided to remain calm. I didn't hear or notice the man moving at all, but when I reached about 10 feet from my car, I couldn't take it anymore. I broke into a sprint and ran the rest of the way. As I had reached my car, I heard the man now running after me. I got inside quickly and drove away as fast as I could. As I did, I felt something hit the car. It seemed like a rock. I drove back to my parents' place and told them everything. There was a decent-sized dent in the side of my car. I stayed there for the night and we called the police as well. However, I don't believe the man was ever caught, but at least I never did hear from him again. This happened on Black Friday about 5 years ago. I was a young 19-year-old woman in my second year of college. I lived pretty close to my school, so I was able to work at a nearby clothing store which was in a pretty big shopping center. I was scheduled to work on Black Friday, which I had done the year before. I knew it would be a long shift and really busy, but I also knew I was getting paid extra, so it was worth it. I got to work early on the morning of Black Friday. We opened at 6 a.m. and I was there. The store I worked at was pretty big, so we had a lot of people working. I was mainly a cashier, but I would also do other tasks as well. As I was working at the cash register shortly after we opened, a man came and checked out in my line. He was middle-aged and bald, and I remember he had a missing tooth in the front. As he was standing there, I could feel him just staring at me the whole time. Then he complimented me on my outfit and seemed to give off a bit of a creepy feeling, but I was nice to him and knew it was just part of the job. After that, he left. About an hour later, I moved from cashier to working in the women's department. As I was folding some clothes, I noticed the man once again. We were pretty busy, not enough where people were lined up outside or anything, but we were much busier than any other day. So I found it strange how I saw the same man once again about an hour later. But the part that I really didn't like is how I caught him just staring at me once again. When we made eye contact, he quickly looked away. It was as if he was almost hiding behind a rack of clothes. I did my best to mind my own business, and eventually the man was gone. About 10 minutes later, the man came back. I was still folding clothes and in the same area, but this time the man actually approached me. He asked me what I was doing after work. I didn't really give him an answer, I just said I don't know. He then asked if I would go with him. I told him no, sorry, and then he grabbed onto my arm. He said we should just leave. This really took me by surprise, and I kind of yelled a little bit. I told him to stop grabbing me. At that point, there were a few people that noticed, and the man let go of me. He then walked away really fast. After that, I told a coworker, but the man was nowhere to be seen, so I thought he would be gone for good. But later on, probably 5 hours later, I saw him again, and he was staring at me. I was sure by now that the man was stalking me or something, and I was kind of concerned he would follow me when I left. I was getting off in about an hour, and I just hoped I wouldn't see the man when I was done. And I didn't, until 10 minutes before I was off when I noticed him. I got a coworker to walk out to my car with me. The man didn't follow me, which was a huge relief, and I drove home. I got home, and thankfully the man didn't follow me. However, that night, I was awoken to a knocking at my front door. I lived with my parents at the time, but I knew it wasn't them or my younger brother because they were all asleep. I lay there confused at first, until I remembered the man who had been stalking me at the store. Then I got a really creepy feeling. I didn't want to get up or even look out the window. Thankfully, I heard the sound of my brother leaving his bedroom. He said out loud he wondered who was knocking on the door at this hour as he walked. It was 2 a.m., and I guess my brother had still been up, most likely playing video games. I heard him get closer to the door, and at that point, I left my room to go over and join him in seeing who was there. As I did, my brother said to me there was nobody there. He then opened the door and stepped out. He looked around and picked up something off the ground, and then came back inside. Once inside, I saw he was holding an envelope. He opened it up and pulled out 2 Polaroid pictures. One of them was of my bedroom window, and the other was of the store that I worked at. When I realized this, I just about had a heart attack. I explained the man to my brother, and I'm 100% sure he's the one who left the envelope. We both woke up my parents, and the police were called. I ended up filling out a report and answering several questions. I got the next few weeks off work, and to my surprise, the next day the man was found at the store once again and caught. On Black Friday of 2016, I went to Walmart to see the deals that they had. There were a number of things that I was interested in getting. Nothing too big like a TV, but a few small things and some Christmas gifts for people. I went there at about midnight, and the store was pretty busy. It was really weird to see a store that crowded at midnight. I looked around, but it was tough to get around the store with it being so crowded. At one point, I was back by the doors to the back room. They had a little window in them, and I randomly was just looking through it to the back rooms. As I did, I noticed someone walking into the back, but they were not a Walmart worker. They wore a ski mask and all black. I thought it had to be some sort of joke or something. There was a worker standing nearby, so I decided to let him know. I told him there was a guy in the back wearing a ski mask. He looked surprised and then asked me to show him where he was. I pointed in the window, and he opened the door and asked me where. We both went inside the back room. It got a lot quieter back there, as there were finally no crowds. I looked in the direction that the man went, and I explained that he was walking that way. Just as I took a few steps in that direction, I felt someone grab me from behind and cover my eyes with their hand. They seemed to be wearing gloves. Then I felt someone else grab my legs, and next thing I knew, I was being picked up by at least 2 people. They carried me a little ways, and then dropped me into what felt like one of those big garbage cans on wheels. I fell onto a bag of garbage. I looked up and saw 2 men in ski masks. They started pushing me and told me to shut up. I wondered how this was going on with no employees seeing this. I couldn't see much, but I saw that we were passing by an open door leading to outside. I don't know what got into me, but at that moment, I felt there was something I had to do. So I jumped against the side, causing the garbage can that I was in to tip over. I fell out of it and got up and began running. I felt the men right on my heels, and once I made it out the door, I took a left for the front end of the store. We were at the side where there was no people, so I ran as fast as I could, and once I made it back to the front, the men stopped chasing me. I ran straight to my car and drove all the way home. Once there, I called the police. I know I should have called them sooner, but my mind was racing, and I was just desperate to get back home where I felt safe. By the time I called, however, I was told there had been other calls about the men in ski masks at that Walmart. I don't know what those men were up to, but I'm so happy I was able to get away. This was on Black Friday 4 years ago. It was in the middle of all the crowded Black Friday shopping going on. I had gone to Best Buy to look at computers. I was intending on buying a new laptop and possibly a desktop computer as well. They were probably the most popular thing that was going on sale there that day, so I got there a couple of hours early and waited in line. There was quite a few other people waiting, so I brought a chair and some hand warmers and just watched videos and played games on my phone as I waited. I remember there was a guy standing behind me who had short blonde hair, and he was just standing there facing me but not really looking at me the entire time. At one point, I asked him how he was doing, but he didn't answer me. He didn't even look at me at all,
The more time went by, it seemed awkward and just really strange as well. At last, finally, the doors to Best Buy were open and all the people rushed inside. I went to the computers and got the laptop I had been planning on getting. I ended up getting the desktop computer as well. I was there for maybe 30 minutes, and then I left and brought the things to my car. I put them in the front passenger seat and then went around and got into the car. But as soon as I sat down and started the engine, I looked in my mirror and saw the man who had been standing behind me in line. He was sitting in the back seat of my car. I freaked out and immediately jumped out of the car and ran all the way back inside to Best Buy. I got out my phone and called the police. Once I regained my composure, I went back out into the parking lot, but my car was gone. I realized I had left the keys in it. The police arrived a short time later. We figured the guy was probably planning to rob me, so I guess he got my stuff. I was just lucky to be okay. But the next day, I got a call saying my car had been found abandoned about 10 miles away, and both of my computers were still inside. Christmas has always been my favorite holiday of the year, a time where your dreams are meant to come true. Well, this story I'm about to tell you happened to me around 27 years ago. I'm 34 now. It all started 2 days before Christmas. My parents needed to get some last-minute Christmas shopping in before the big day arrived, and my parents dropped me off at one of those North Pole Santa grottos in the center of the mall. They told me they would take just about 15 minutes. I sighed and started to walk over to the stereotypical mall Santa. White, long beard, big red coat, and everything you can expect from Santa Claus. The line wasn't too long, so I easily got my turn with Santa in less than a few minutes. The man, looking to be in his 60s with his Santa beard looking like it hadn't been washed in weeks, called me over to him and sat me on his knee. He asked me what it was I wanted for Christmas. I replied saying I just wanted the new Nintendo. It was one of the early Nintendos at the time, and every kid wanted it. The old man replied with a very strange answer that hit me by surprise. He asked me for my home address, so he could, quote, know where to deliver my gift. And of course, I fell for his trick, as I was only 7 at the time, and believed in all the magical fantasies that Santa Claus was going to visit me on Christmas Day. I gave him my address and he dismissed me. He gave me one last smile and wave as I ran off into the crowd to meet my parents, who were now in the clothing store next to the grotto. I wish this is where my story ended, but what happened on Christmas Eve still haunts me to this day. I woke up to a dark and quiet room. It was still pitch black outside, with the winter snow piling up my bedroom window. I was dehydrated and felt like I needed to get a glass of water downstairs from the kitchen before I tried to get more sleep. However, it struck me that I would have to go past the Christmas tree to get to the kitchen. My parents always said that I'm not allowed in the living room until the morning because Santa would see me. The thirst overcame me, and I forced myself out of my room and into the balcony overlooking the living room. But something caught my eye. There was this very tall person in a long red robe wearing the same Santa hat. He also had a big red sack of presents. I quietly opened the door into my 5-year-old sister's room to wake her and tell her that Santa was here. But when I entered the room, she was gone. This surprised me, as she normally won't leave her room like this at this time of night. I made my way back to the balcony, and I watched in horror as 3 men who all appeared to be in their late 30s were wearing elf costumes, and they entered the room. I saw my sister being given a gift from the guy dressed up as Santa, and the 3 other men leading her outside of the front door. I screamed and yelled. All 4 of the men backed out of the door, leaving my sister in tears. Not realizing the situation, I told her the story and forced her not to tell our parents. Then I put her back in her room. I made my way back to my room and went to sleep, forgetting all about the water. I just wanted to pretend like the night never happened. To this day, I still don't know what happened, but I never saw that dirty old Santa at the mall again. However, I'm sure that it was him at my house that night. This story happened 4 years ago on Christmas Eve. I live with my wife sort of out in the country. The houses in my neighborhood are kind of spaced out, and we have a fairly big yard. That's why on Christmas Eve at about 9 p.m. at night, I was really surprised to hear knocking coming from the front door of our house. I walked over to the window to get a look outside and see who was there, but when I looked, there was nobody. I went around to every window that I could, and I looked to see if anybody was outside, but I couldn't see anyone at all, although it was pretty dark out. It was strange to say the least, but I figured it was probably some kind of prank. I thought, what else could it be? We got some snow that night, and the next morning when I woke up, we could see there was a bunch of footprints all over our backyard which hadn't been there the night before. The creepy part was they seemed to be headed towards my shed that I had in the back. I was concerned, so I decided to take a walk out to my shed to see if anything happened to it or if anything was missing inside. I walked out there, and once I arrived, I opened it up. As soon as I did, I saw a man in the corner turn around and then start charging at me. I turned and ran back for my house. Luckily, I was able to make it back inside before the man. I quickly called the police and watched from the window as the man went back into my shed. The police arrived a while later and arrested the man. He turned out to be on drugs and had wandered into the area. I'm a 20-year-old female, and 2 years ago, my family was having my aunt and cousins over for Christmas. The day before Christmas Eve, I went to a nearby shopping center to get my aunt a last-minute gift. I really had no idea what to get her, but I was finally able to find a nice hat that I was sure she would like. I was looking around the store before leaving, and a man approached me. He was much older than me, but appeared to be maybe in his 30s. He had a shaved head and just immediately seemed kind of creepy. He walked right up to me and asked me how I was doing. I told the man I was good and I was just about to leave. At that point, he asked me where I was going and if I wanted to get some drinks with him. I told him no thanks and then started to walk away. But the man followed me as I did and asked me what was wrong and why I didn't want to go with him. It was clear to me that he was going to keep following me. So eventually, I stopped and turned to him and told him in a firm voice to stop following me. Thankfully, the store was pretty crowded, and some people appeared to look over a little bit. The man stepped back and said fine and then walked away. I carefully stayed in the store for a while and then left to make sure that the man wouldn't follow me or anything like that. I got the hat from my aunt and then left the store to go to my car. I got in and began to drive away, but as I started to drive, I noticed an older-looking van with the man sticking his head out of the window at me and smiling in the creepiest way possible. It gave me the chills as I drove off, and I was once again careful to make sure that he didn't follow me. I was able to make it back home all right, and the man didn't follow me, but I just feel lucky with how busy the store was, because the way that man was smiling at me was completely insane. I just want to start off by saying that Christmas is my favorite holiday, but every year I remember what happened to my family and I on Christmas years ago. I was 12 years old at the time, and I went to my cousin's house with my family to celebrate. On Christmas Eve, my family and I decided to stay the night at my cousin's house because our house was sort of far away. There were guest bedrooms for my family and I to sleep in, but I woke up at about 4 a.m. When I did, I heard noises downstairs, so I decided to go check it out. I went downstairs, and when I did, I saw someone dressed as Santa Claus. I saw him looking around in the kitchen and looking for gifts under the Christmas tree. There wasn't that many Christmas presents left because my family and I had opened most of them, but there were still a few left under the Christmas tree. I went back upstairs and woke up my dad. He came downstairs with me, but there was no one inside the house. My dad told me I had just had a bad dream. I decided to go back to sleep, and in the morning when everyone was up, we were getting ready to eat breakfast. My uncle went in the basement to go get some drinks, when he said he saw the basement window was shattered and it looked like someone had climbed in. My uncle called the cops, and when the cops came, they couldn't find any other evidence other than the broken window. My whole family was scared. My uncle and dad checked the whole house to make sure nothing was stolen. After a while, my uncle and dad came running downstairs and came into the kitchen where we all were, and said they heard something in the attic. They went back upstairs to check it out, and shortly after that, they started yelling because they saw the man that I had seen dressed as Santa Claus hiding behind a bunch of boxes. They called the police once again, and all of us went outside to wait for the cops to arrive. When the police came, the officers went running inside and pulled the man out of the attic. They found that he had a knife and tape in his pockets. The officer said it wasn't just him breaking into our house, but there had been multiple reports of someone dressed as Santa Claus walking near people's houses in the area, and we were the fourth call. The officers also told us that these